No softballs for this gentleman. Who has the first question?
Wow.
Okay, well, thank you.
I'm with you till 4, or until you ask me to leave. So.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. I'm Meade Treadwell, Lieutenant Governor in Alaska, and actually, well, I've been involved in elections one way or another for a long time. I'm new to the business of running an election. And I have to say I had not paid much attention to the provisions in the Constitution that kind of share power on elections between the Congress and the states. But I do feel, as this proposed resolution has, that it's essentially the state's responsibility, and in many states delegate this to local governments as well, or work with local governments. I guess my questions for you are, number one, how do you feel about the idea of actually fining states for not following federal law exactly on elections issues? That's one that has come up before us, and I'd love to have a dialogue about that. The second issue is, it's kind of a question and a request, is that we right now do our elections on paper. There's very little of it electronic. People can fax their ballots in. We're moving to offer broader electronic things, but we have not been briefed, and we can't get a classified briefing on who can read a file as it's moving across the wires. And I'm just very concerned about how there's a lot of people pushing us to move away from the paper trail to go fully to electronics, and it would really be helpful to have Congress look at the privacy issue as that happens, because there's so many ways to impinge on a voter's privacy if you move to electronics.
Well, I appreciate that, and welcome to NASS as well. Happy to see you as a new member. Let me take the last question first. When I was elected Secretary of State back in my first day of office was January 1st, 2003, we had just had the Help America Vote Act signed into law. And we had these very discussions, and those that were elected before me actually had pretty good input, as I understand it, into the making of the law as the Congress was writing it. And so these issues were were very well debated then, and now carry on. I come from a state and personally believe in the validity of electronic machines. Having said that, we left it up to our counties to decide what machines fit them best, as long as they were compliant with the Help America Vote Act. So in Indiana, we have a patchwork of paper-based machines and completely electronic ones, and they work well. So as I remember the debate, I heard the concerns about privacy from the other end. The concerns about privacy were actually in the paper, and that was a reason to go to electronic. Do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, and I'm not as concerned about it. We do electronic scanning, optical scanning, and so forth. It's more kind of the cyberspace voting, to be able to vote online from wherever, if it's coming from a computer in a foreign country, the National Security Agency can read what's coming in because it's not presumably a U.S. citizen, or how would they know that? And the general question is, if we move to a system where it's all online voting, or move toward that, and we're under lots of different pressures here right now, and some of it from Congress to do that for overseas voters. What protections can you offer to make sure that votes still stay private?
Well, I've been asked to come, not to speak on behalf of other members. I can certainly speak for myself and part of Indiana, but I can also give you a sense of what Congress may do in the here and now, based on the membership that we have. And I think that the way you'd see us approach your question would be to empower the state and the states as much as possible. That would be the approach you'd see coming out of a majority of the House Administration Committee on this issue, for example. And I think that's where this decision lies. The answer to your question lies at the state level, and what your voters and what your taxpayers are most comfortable with. I think you have to keep in mind, though, that once you lose the confidence of your voters and your taxpayers and the nations, I think Florida, 2000, you're going to see the federal government and Congress, like we always do, react quickly, and generally overreact to the situation. So I think your goal has to be, in an aura of federalism, do what you need to do to keep the confidence of the voter and the taxpayer in the process that you have. And that's, not to dive into another topic, but that's an example of how we successfully approached photo ID in the state of Indiana. It was a confidence builder, and it's successful. It's actually increased voter turnout. So in your issue, I think if you approach it the same way, that's what you have to do, and do it that way, and then you have that backstop in the defense to say to the federal government, stay the heck out. What protections can we give you? We can talk about and debate that, but I think that if you're going to have a system, you need to be able to have the protections yourself first. There was a first question there. I'm sorry.
How about the issue of fining state officials? And I know that Secretary Chapman is up to speed on that.
Yeah, I might have to be briefed a little bit on this, but there's no talk about that going on in the House Administration Committee that I know of. That seems pretty draconian to me, but maybe I don't understand the issue completely.
Was it not recommended by the Justice Department?
No, that was a separate issue that we discussed, but it's something that's occurring in our state with the question of who appropriately handles those filings, which the Secretary of State's office does in our state, but we do not police or enforce them. And so I've asked most of the representatives here from their states how they do, and of course there is a patchwork of how it's done, so a little bit different in every state. But one of those questions was, who follows up on those candidate filings, and if they haven't reported in 3 years, or they reported 2 weeks late, or they have misleading information on those filings, are they fined? Who polices and enforces those? And the Attorney General in many cases does.
And the filings being the declarations of candidacy or the campaign?
Financial filings.
Oh, the financial filings. I'll save that one for Mr. Perez a little bit.
If I could, offer some further clarification on the question. I think we heard from Bob Carey this morning in FFAP that look, the reason that the Secretaries of State or the states are liable is because that's what the federal law says. The federal law says the states are liable for UCAVA voters, for example, in ensuring that the ballots go out on time. But yet, every state has different sets of rules, as you're well aware of as a former Secretary of State. And in many cases, we are being held accountable for something that we don't actually have control over. And the idea that federal officials, the members of Congress that work on these issues, because it sounds, we all know we've all worked at different levels of government, and we know how this sounds. We'll put it control of the states, but the states don't do it all the same. And we have in Ohio, for example, 88 counties. I never handle a ballot. Never. One never comes through our office. They're all done locally. And so to be held liable for something that we have no control over seems to be a disconnect between how the law is perceived in terms of its implementation at the local level, the state level, and how the federal government believes that it should be implemented.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That warms me up a little bit. We had similar types of issues, penalty and accountability, but not the responsibility, in the Help America Vote Act. And then as Secretary of State in the state of Indiana for 8 years, that was the story of my life. It seemed like we were always responsible and accountable for things that we had little control over. So I don't mean to be blasé about this, but I've certainly become, John, desensitized to it. So part of me tells you, hey, let's suck it up and get the job done, because that's what Secretaries of State do. Having said that, there has to be a reasonable approach, and I would be interested to work with this organization if you find an alternative way regarding the issue of accountability, or a process to make sure that we can best do our job as Chief Election Officer without unfairly being held to account for something we have no control over at all. I'd love to work with you on a bill if I